First of all, the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center, we are a small private museum. It was started actually in November of 2005. It was founded by myself and a Lao colleague of mine, a Lao friend of mine. Like I explained, I think in the introduction yesterday, my background is anthropology and development work. I've specialized a little bit in sustainable tourism development. However, my colleague Tongkun Sutivilai, who's from Lompabang, her background is in museum. She was the collections manager at the National Museum in Lompabang for over 10 years. So the two of us together brought my anthropology experience and her kind of museums and collections management experience to create the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center. We started this museum because we saw that there was very little accurate or interesting information about the cultural diversity of Laos. We got the startup funding from private donors and foundations. So we opened in July of 2007, so we're just about 3 years old now. And we are a private museum, though we operate as a nonprofit museum. And among the many activities I'll go through, I mean, if you visited our museum, you would see we have the exhibitions like most museums. We have a museum shop, which I'll explain about later, and we also have a cafe. To give you some of the context, thank you. We are located in Lompabang, which is in the north of Laos. It's actually only an hour flight from here. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Has anybody been to Lompabang? Yes, raise your hand. Actually, quite a lot of people. Great. Lompabang has experienced a lot of growth in tourism over the last 15 years or so, over 400%. So that means that a lot of foreign visitors are coming to the country. And that's bringing in a lot of wealth. However, the country of Lao PDR is still a developing country. 83% of the population is still located in rural areas and dependent on agriculture, mainly upland rice farming. And ethnic minorities still make up a large portion of the poor people in Laos. So ethnic minorities tend to be poorer than the Lao people are. This is a map that we show in our museum. The colors are hard to see here, but it just kind of gives you an idea of the different kind of ethnic groups or language groups that live in the country. Laos is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in Southeast Asia, with a population of about 6.8 million people. The Dai Lao, the majority group, is only 55% of the population, so you get an idea that almost half of the population is many different small groups. And officially, currently, 49 groups are recognized by the government. However, we could go into a lot of discussion of how do we categorize groups. Just to give you some pictures, ideas of the different groups living in the country. There's a lot of overlap, obviously, with southern China, with northern Thailand, northern Vietnam. We have the Austroasiatic group, which is about 24% of the population, includes the Daoi, Lamet, Gamu groups. We have the Hmong Yao groups. This is small, only 8.5% of the population. Includes the Hmong, the Yao Mien, and the Yao Mun. Dai Kadai groups, this is the largest language group. 65% of the population includes the majority Lao. Also Dai Dam, Dai Lu, and Dai Dang. Yesterday, when we were in the temple, they were talking about the Dai Yong, which are actually, from what I understand, part of the Dai Lu group. And finally, the Sino-Tibetan, which is the smallest group, 2.8% of the population. You can probably tell from the photographs, they're the ones that are kind of, they're a bit dark, but they look sort of the most kind of exotic and tribal when people think about it. There's a lot of Aka subgroups here. Now to go a little bit more into the activities of TAEC. We do exhibitions, research. These are the sort of 5 areas that we break up our work into. Preservation and documentation, education and advocacy and livelihoods. Our exhibitions our exhibition space is quite small. We're a small museum, but we have exhibitions on 7 ethnic groups currently, with text in many different languages, photographs, objects, like a traditional museum. Currently, we have a temporary exhibition up on Taoism, and I'll be going into that in more detail. That's at my case study. One thing that's a little bit different about our exhibitions is that we really try to show the changing lifestyles of the ethnic minority groups in the country. So we don't just look at the traditional lives. Grouped together, I've put research, preservation, and documentation. This includes our collections as well. We do primary research in communities. We have a small team that goes out at least twice a year. One of the tools we've been using more is community cultural mapping. I think that's something you're going to be getting more in this course later. Our collection is pretty small. Though not for us, over 300 objects currently from 25 different ethnic groups and subgroups. And one thing that we do in research is we do try to collaborate with anthropologists. So we have a board, we work with a lot of anthropologists to try to integrate their information in our exhibits. We have a lot of education and outreach activities. We have a library. We do a lot of work with schools and school children in Lompabang. We also have started a program of ethnic youth internships I'll tell you about. We do also guides training. That's something important in a site where you have a lot of guides that are trying to interpret their culture for visitors. And something that we've kind of started more recently over the last year is doing some more capacity building of other museums in Laos, actually, that are looking to try to change their approach to museology. And finally, advocacy and livelihoods. This is one of the objectives that we find most important, but the most challenging. And we'll talk about this. I'll talk about this more towards the end. One of the most concrete ways in which we try to kind of advocate and promote sustainable livelihoods for the communities we work with is through handicrafts that are sold in our museum shop. So our museum shop is all traditional handicrafts, particularly from source communities that we do research in, but also others. And other things that we are trying to do more about is kind of supporting more identity building and pride within the ethnic communities themselves. So this is where we kind of get a little bit further away from just traditional museum work, but as part of this intangible cultural heritage kind of safeguarding work. This was the vision that we came up with 3-4 years ago when we started this center. And you'll notice that one of the things we mentioned is appreciation for the cultures and skills of Laos's people. And we also talk about sustainable livelihood development. This is something a little bit broader than I think a lot of museums might mention. One of the reasons, which I'll discuss further, is that we see that in the Lao context, particularly a developing country context with a lot of poverty, particularly in the source communities we work with, that having sustainable livelihoods is a prerequisite to kind of cultural development and identity building, et cetera. So as I said, we would consider ourselves not a strict museum type institution, but a little bit broader than that. Okay, looking at ICH and TEC, we are an ethnology museum. So what that means basically is that in basic terms, that we try to explore cultures and people and their similarities and differences. So there are a lot of different kinds of people and cultures in Laos, and we're trying to explore those and look at ways in which they're similar and different. We represent living cultures. We've kind of talked about that a little bit in this program so far. So as I mentioned before, documenting and safeguarding ICH has been a goal of our museum from the beginning, though as I said, we didn't necessarily call it ICH. We just said we need to look for a way to support the cultures and the cultural diversity of this country.